There is a chair at the table that nobody sits in anymore. You did not move it. You are not sure why. Maybe because moving it would mean something you are not ready to mean, so it stays. And on Sunday mornings, when the light comes through the window the way it always did, you look at it for just a second before you look away. You know the number of days since she last called. You are not proud of that, but you know it. This is the grief that has no funeral. No casseroles arrive at the door. No one sends flowers, because from the outside nothing has died. Your daughter is alive. She is somewhere, working, eating, living her life, and somehow that makes it harder, not easier, because the silence is a choice, and chosen silence lands differently than absence. It lands in a place words cannot quite reach. If you are watching this video, you already know what I mean. You do not need me to explain the weight of an unanswered text. You do not need me to describe the way a birthday passes, and you check your phone until midnight, and then put it face down on the nightstand. You have lived it. You are living it now. And here is what I want to say to you before anything else, before the scripture, before the history, before the stories of men and women who walked this same road centuries before you were born. God sees this. Not in a vague, general, spiritual way, specifically. The way he sees everything that matters. The way he has always seen the people the world forgets to look at. There is a woman we will meet before this video ends. Not the daughter in this story. Not the mother. A woman who walked into a desert with her child and sat down in the sand because she could not bear to watch what was coming. We will come back to her. But not yet. First, I need you to understand something. This is not a video about what you did wrong. This is not a video about how to fix your daughter or manufacture a reconciliation on a timeline that suits you. This is not a video about getting an apology or deserving one or waiting for one. This is a video about what God says to the parent who is left holding silence. And what he says. What he has always said, in every generation, to every mother and father who has sat in this particular kind of darkness, might be the last thing you expect. Stay with me. The first man we need to talk about is Jacob. You know the name. You may know the story. But I want you to slow down and actually look at what happened to this man, because the Bible does not rush past it the way we sometimes do in Sunday school. Jacob had 12 sons. And one of them, Joseph, the one with the coat, the one who dreamed dreams that made his brothers grind their teeth. That son disappeared one afternoon and did not come back. His brothers brought Jacob the coat. It had been dipped in goat's blood, and Jacob looked at it, and his mind went to the only place a father's mind can go in that moment. He believed his son was dead. He was wrong. Joseph was alive, sold into slavery in Egypt, working in a foreign house, sleeping in a foreign bed, speaking a language that was not his own, alive. But Jacob did not know that. And for more than 20 years, Jacob carried a grief that had no bottom. The scripture uses a Hebrew word for what Jacob felt. The word is Hagar. It does not mean sadness the way we use that word on a hard Monday. Hagar means a piercing, an affliction that goes past the surface of a person and settles in the deep places. It is the word you use when grief has moved in and stopped pretending it is a temporary guest. Jacob's family tried to comfort him. His sons, his daughters, they gathered around him and they said the things people say. And Genesis tells us, simply and without drama, that Jacob refused to be comforted. He said, and these are his words, "I shall go down to Sheol to my son, mourning." He was not being poetic, he meant it. He would carry this grief to his grave. Here is what most people miss when they read that story. The Bible does not correct Jacob for grieving too much. It does not insert a narrator's note saying he should have trusted God more, or surrendered sooner, or found peace faster. It just records what he felt, as if God looked at this father weeping over a coat that smelled like goat's blood and said, "Yes, I see that. I am not rushing you. Your grief over your daughter is not a spiritual failure. It is not evidence of weak faith." Jacob was the man God renamed Israel, the father of a nation, a patriarch whose name is carved into the identity of God's chosen people. And he wept for 20 years over a child he thought he had lost. You are in serious company. Now stay with me, because the second story surprises people every time. Her name is Mary. And before she was the woman at the foot of the cross, before she was the mother who watched her son die in public with soldiers standing around and crowds shouting things she could not unhear, before all of that, she was a mother who lost her 12-year-old boy in a city of hundreds of thousands of people and did not know where he was for 3 days. Luke's gospel records the moment she found him, sitting in the temple, talking to the teachers, completely unbothered. And Mary said to him, with words that every parent in this video will recognize in their bones, "Son, why have you treated us so? Your father and I have been searching for you in great distress." Great distress. That is the translation. The Greek underneath it is odunomai, a word that means anguish, pain, the kind of suffering that comes from not knowing where someone you love has gone. Mary, the woman chosen above all women to carry the Son of God, stood in the temple in Jerusalem and said to her child, "Do you know what these 3 days have cost us?" He did not fully explain himself. He asked her a question she did not understand. And Luke tells us she treasured all these things in her heart. That is a beautiful line. It is also a quietly heartbreaking one, because sometimes loving someone means you carry the things they cannot yet explain. You hold them. You do not throw them away. You just hold them. If Mary could stand in that temple with tears still drying on her face and choose to hold rather than discard, you are watching the right person. She knew this road before the cross. She knew what it was to search for a child who did not know how worried you were. The third story is shorter. But do not let that fool you. Her name is Naomi. And by the time we meet her in the book of Ruth, she has lost her husband and both of her sons in a foreign country. She is an Israelite woman in Moab with nothing left, no income, no protection, no future she can see from where she is standing. She tells her daughters-in-law to go back to their own families, find new husbands, start over. She uses a word about herself that stops me every time I read it. She says, "Do not call me Naomi anymore. Naomi means pleasant, call me Mara. Mara means bitter. She renamed herself after her grief. That is how deep it had gone, and yet Ruth stayed. Ruth said the words that have outlasted every empire that existed when she spoke them. Wherever you go, I will go. And slowly, quietly, in the back fields of Bethlehem, in the gleaning of grain that was left behind for the poor, God began to move. Naomi did not see it coming. She was too deep in the bitter to see the harvest. But the harvest was already in motion. Here is what the Bible is doing across all 3 of these stories. Jacob, Mary, Naomi. It is not telling grieving parents to feel less. It is not handing them a 5-step plan. It is giving them company. It is saying, look at these people. Look at how broken they were. Look at where they were standing when God had not yet shown them what he was doing. That is where you are standing right now. In the not yet. And the not yet is not the end of the story. Before we go any further, I want to pause for just a moment, because if you have made it this far into this video, something in these stories has touched something in you. Jacob weeping over a coat. Mary searching the streets of Jerusalem. Naomi so broken she could not answer to her own name anymore. These are not distant figures behind stained glass. These are parents. These are people who loved someone and found themselves holding silence where a relationship used to be. And God did not look away from a single one of them. He is not looking away from you either. If this video is speaking to something you have been carrying, something you have not been able to say out loud to most people in your life, I want to ask you to do one thing before we continue. Subscribe to this channel. Because every week we come back to the scripture and we look at it the way it was meant to be looked at. Not as a rule book, not as a list of requirements, but as the living record of a God who has always shown up for people in exactly this kind of moment. And leave a comment below. Tell me, which of these three stories landed closest to where you are right now? Jacob, who grieved for 20 years, Mary, who searched for 3 days in great distress, or Naomi, who renamed herself after her pain. You do not have to explain everything. One name is enough. We are not finished. In fact, what comes next? A father who ran, a mother who wept for 17 years, and a woman alone in a desert at the end of everything she had. What comes next is where this story finds its weight. Stay with me. There is a parable Jesus told that most people think they know. They have heard it so many times. In sermons, in songs, on wall art in Christian bookstores, that they have stopped actually listening to it. I want you to listen to it again, because there is something in this story that your tradition may never have told you. Something that changes the weight of it entirely. A man had 2 sons. The younger one came to him one day and asked for his share of the inheritance. Pay attention to this. In the Middle East in the 1st century, a son asking for his inheritance while his father was still alive was not simply rude. It was not a cultural faux pas. A scholar named Kenneth Bailey spent decades living in the Middle East, studying the parables of Jesus through the lens of the culture that produced them. And Bailey says this: a son making that request was the social equivalent of saying to his father, "I wish you were dead. You are worth more to me as a corpse than as a living man." The father could have responded with anger. He could have responded with public rebuke. And in that culture, public rebuke would have been not only acceptable but expected. Instead, he divided his property between his sons and let the younger one go. He let him go. The son left, wasted everything, ended up in a foreign country feeding pigs, which, for a Jewish audience hearing Jesus tell this story, was about as low as a human being could sink. And then the scripture says he came to himself. He rehearsed a little speech. He started walking home. And here is where Jesus does something that would have shocked every person listening to him that day. The father sees him coming, while he was still a great way off. Which means the father was looking. He was watching the road, not once, not occasionally. Every day, in the direction his son had gone, this man was watching. And when he sees the shape of his son on the horizon, the Greek word the gospel uses for what happens inside the father is splachnisomai. It is not a polite word. It does not mean he felt warmly disposed toward his son, or that he experienced a gentle sense of goodwill. Splagnisomai means compassion that moves in your gut, your bowels. Literally, the ancient world located deep emotion in the stomach, not the heart. This is the word used when Jesus sees a crowd of sick and hungry people and cannot walk past them. It is the same word here. The father sees his son, and something moves in him that bypasses thought entirely, and then he runs. This is where Kenneth Bailey's cultural research matters most. Older men in 1st century Middle Eastern culture did not run in public. Running required lifting your robe, exposing your legs. It was considered undignified, beneath the gravity of a man of standing. For the father to run toward his returning son was to absorb public shame before the boy had taken another step. He humiliated himself first, so that his son would not have to walk through the village alone. That is not a small detail. That is the whole story. The father in this parable did not know when his son was coming back. He did not know if his son was coming back. He only knew one thing. He would keep watching the road, and this is where it gets remarkable. The Jewish historian Josephus, writing about the grief of parents separated from their children, described it as a wound that does not scar, a wound that reopens at the same hour each day with the same force it had the first time. Josephus was not a Christian. He was not writing theology. He was writing history, and even he knew the loss of a child in any form does not behave like other losses. It does not follow the normal rules of healing. Jacob knew that. Josephus knew that. And Jesus, in the parable of the father who ran, was speaking directly to every parent who has ever stood at a window watching a road that stayed empty. Now, there is one more story before we reach the woman in the desert. And this one takes place not in ancient Israel, but in the 4th century. In a Roman city called Carthage, in a household where a mother was quietly coming apart. Her name was Monica. Her son's name was Augustine. And for 17 years, 17, Monica prayed for her son's conversion while he lived a life that broke her heart in ways she could not have anticipated when she first held him as an infant. Augustine was brilliant. He was also, by his own later admission, proud, sensual, and deeply committed to a philosophical system that kept God at arm's length. He took a mistress. He fathered a child outside of marriage. He chased reputation and pleasure through Carthage, through Rome, through Milan, while his mother followed him. Not always physically, but always in prayer. She went to a bishop once, weeping, asking him to speak to Augustine, to reason with him, to do something. And the bishop, tired, perhaps, of her persistence, said something that became the hinge of her life. He said, "It is impossible that the son of these tears should perish." Monica held that sentence for years. She could not see the harvest from where she was standing. Augustine would later write about her in his Confessions, a book that has not been out of print in 1600 years. And he said that his mother wept over him more than mothers weep over the bodily death of their children, more than if he had died, because there is a kind of grief that is worse than burial. The grief of watching someone you love choose every day to walk further away. Monica did not give up. She did not perform her grief publicly or weaponize it to manipulate her son. She prayed. She wept. She waited. And the Hebrew word for that kind of waiting is kava, a word that does not mean sitting passively in a chair staring at a wall. Kava means to wait the way a cord waits when it is stretched between 2 points. Taut, holding tension, bound to something on the other end that has not yet arrived. Monica's waiting was a cord. It stretched across 17 years, and it did not break. Augustine was baptized in Milan in the year 387. Monica died a few weeks later, at peace, in a town called Ostia, on the Italian coast. She had seen enough. The cord had held your waiting is not weakness. It is not evidence that you have failed to move on, or heal, or accept. Kava. This is what it looks like when a parent refuses to cut the cord. When you keep the chair at the table. When you know the number of days. That is not pathology. That is love with its feet still on the ground. Now we go back to the desert. Her name is Hagar. And if you have heard her story before, I want you to set aside what you think you know about it and look at it again. Because this is not primarily a story about Abraham or Sarah or the complicated politics of a patriarch's household. This is a story about a mother at the end of everything she had. And what God did when he found her there. Hagar was Egyptian. She was a slave, which means she had no choices in the household of Abraham, including the choice that led to the birth of her son, Ishmael. She did not ask for any of this. She did not negotiate her position. She was a woman in a world that did not ask women like her what they wanted. She bore Abraham a son. And then, years later, When Sarah's own son Isaac was born, the household dynamic shifted in a direction Hagar could not survive. Sarah told Abraham to send her away, to send both of them away, Hagar and the boy, into the desert, with a skin of water and some bread. And Abraham, the great man of faith, the father of nations, sent them. They walked into the wilderness of Beersheba. The water ran out. Hagar looked at her son. She looked at the desert around them, and she made a decision that I think is one of the most honest moments in all of Scripture. She took the boy and put him under one of the bushes. And then she walked away. About the distance of a bowshot, the text says, far enough that she could not see him clearly anymore. And she sat down, and she said, I cannot watch the boy die. She did not say it to Abraham. She did not say it to a priest or a prophet or anyone who would write it down for posterity. She said it to the air, to the desert, to whatever might be listening, and God was listening. The angel of God called to Hagar from heaven, not from the temple, not from behind a curtain in a sacred space. From heaven to a slave woman sitting in the sand with her face in her hands. He said, What troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, what troubles you? He asked her the question as if he genuinely wanted to hear the answer, as if the answer mattered, as if this woman, unnamed in the genealogies that would follow, irrelevant to the political and theological architecture of everything that came after, as if she mattered enough to ask. God said, I have heard the voice of the boy where he is. Lift up the boy, hold him fast with your hand. And then he opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. It was there the whole time. She could not see it. She was too far into the grief, too deep in the place where a parent goes when they have run out of road. But the water was there, and God did not move her to a better desert. He opened her eyes to what was already present in the one she was sitting in. Here is the part nobody tells you about this story. This is not the first time God found Hagar in a desert. Earlier in Genesis, when she first fled from Sarah's harshness, God met her then too, at a spring of water in the wilderness, and she gave God a name that no one else in Scripture gives him. She called him El Roi, the God who sees me, not the God who is everywhere, not the God who knows all things. She named him for the specific thing he had done for her. He had seen her in a desert, when no one else was looking, the God who sees, and now in this second desert, with her son dying under a bush and the water gone, and her face turned away because she cannot bear to watch, he finds her again. Because that is what El Roi does. That is not a title he wore once and retired. That is who he is. Think about where you are right now. Not in a desert, perhaps. Maybe in a kitchen on a Sunday morning. The light coming through the window the way it always did. Your phone on the counter. You picked it up 20 minutes ago and looked at the last message your daughter sent. 2 words. I'm fine. Sent 4 days ago. And the silence since then has been so loud. You have had to turn the television on just to have another voice in the room. You put the phone face down. You made coffee. You sat at the table with the chair that nobody sits in anymore, and you thought, does anyone see this? Hagar thought the same thing. In a language you would not recognize, in a desert that no longer exists, in a world so different from yours that almost nothing about it would be familiar. A mother sat down in the sand and thought the same thing you are thinking right now. And God said, I see you. I hear the child. I am here, not after you recover, not after the relationship is restored, not on the other side of the reconciliation you are praying for now. In the kitchen, with the phone face down and the coffee going cold and the chair that stays empty, the prophet Isaiah asked a question that cuts through everything else this video has tried to say. He wrote, can a woman forget her nursing child? Can a mother have no compassion on the child of her womb? The Hebrew word is shakach, to forget, to cease to care for, to let something slip from your attention as if it no longer matters. Isaiah answers his own question. Even if a mother could catch her child, and he says even these may forget. God says, I will not forget you. God is not using a mother's love as a nice metaphor. He is using it as the highest benchmark of devotion he can find in human experience. And then he says, I exceed it. You have not been forgotten, not by the God who found a slave woman in a desert and asked what troubles you, not by the God who saw Jacob weeping over a coat for 20 years. Not by the God who let a father run down a road in public with his robe lifted and his dignity set aside because his child was finally coming home. He sees the chair. He knows the number of days. And he has not looked away. So let me leave you with 3 things. The first is this. The Bible does not treat your grief as a problem to be solved. It does not hand you a timeline or a technique or a 5-step path back to a relationship that only your daughter can choose to restore. What it does, what it has always done, is place you in a line of people who carried this same weight and were not destroyed by it. Jacob carried it for 20 years. Monica carried it for 17. Naomi carried it until she could not answer to her own name, and not one of them was abandoned in the carrying of it. The grief is real, the scripture says so. Yaga, piercing, deep, settled in the bones. God does not ask you to feel less than you feel. He asks you to let him sit with you in it. The second thing is this. The waiting is not wasted. The Hebrew word kava, the word the scripture uses for the kind of waiting that honors God, does not mean passive endurance. It means a cord stretched taut between 2 points. It means something is holding. Something on the other end has not let go. Monica's cord held for 17 years. The father in the parable watched the road every day without knowing if the day he was watching would be the day. And when the day came, it came. The cord held. Your waiting is not a sign that you have failed to heal or move on or accept the situation. Your waiting is the cord, and it is holding. The third thing, and this is the one I want you to carry out of this video, is the simplest and the hardest. The father in the parable did not know when his son was coming back. He did not receive a message. He did not get a sign. He had no guarantee that the road would ever deliver what he was watching for. He only knew one thing: he would keep watching. Every day, in the direction his child had gone, he would turn his face and he would look. That is not stubbornness. That is not an inability to accept reality. That is not something the father invented. That is the posture of a person who has decided that love does not have an expiration date. And here is what I want you to understand. That posture, that daily turning of the face toward the road, that is something he learned. Because that is exactly what God does. Every morning, in the direction of every person he has ever loved, he turns and he looks. He is El Roi, the God who sees. He has been watching your road longer than you have been watching hers. You are not alone in that kitchen. You are not alone at that table. The chair may be empty, but the room is not. Before I go, I want to ask you one question, and I genuinely want to know your answer. Which story in this video stayed with you the longest? Was it Jacob, who wept for 20 years over a child he thought was gone? Was it Monica, who prayed through 17 years of silence until the cord finally held? Or was it Hagar, a woman with no power and no options, sitting in the sand with her face turned away, who discovered that the God of the universe knew exactly where she was? Tell me in the comments. One name is enough. And if you are carrying this quietly, if this is the grief you do not talk about at dinner or at church, because there are no words for it that other people seem to understand, know this. He sees you. The road is still there, and so are you.